And thanks for staying with us on Morning Live. Now, current acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo is the fourth and final candidate that the Judicial Service Commission will interview later today for the position of the country's Chief Justice. 61-year-old Zondo was born in Ixopo in KwaZulu-Natal and has gone on to have a lengthy legal career. Now, he served in various courts, including the Labour and Supreme Court of Appeal. And Zondo was also part of a task team that developed the draft legislation on labour relations for post-apartheid South Africa in 1994. And this saw the passing of the Labour Relations Act of 1995. And yesterday, another candidate, Judge President of the Gauteng High Court Division, Dunstan Mlambo, said that the Judicial Service Commission should warn candidates before the interview when there are serious allegations against them. And this was after he was unexpectedly asked to respond to allegations of sexual harassment against him. And corruption allegations also surfaced during the interview by the Judicial Service Commission. So for more on what has transpired during these interviews and what we can expect as well, today we're joined by political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze. Professor, good morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
So, Professor, what have been your observations of the process thus far?
I think the process is the best we've had so far, in the sense that President Ramaphosa opened it up, first of all, for nominations by the public. Then the shortlisting was done by a separate committee chaired by former Judge Pillay. And now this interviews by the Judicial Service Commission. So it's a very extensive process. It's much more that has happened in the past. Because ultimately it is in the hands of President Ramaphosa as president, national president, to appoint the Chief Justice. And he now, in a sense, decentralized it to a large extent. The process, the decision still remains his. And I think that created much more confidence or credibility in the process.
Professor, just looking at the candidates that have been interviewed so far, 3 out of the 4, and of course a much anticipated one today with the acting Chief Justice. Are you in a position to say, and please indicate if you're not comfortable in doing so, but looking at the 3 candidates that have interviewed so far, is there anyone that stood out for you? And perhaps overall, if you would like, also just to give us a sense of the 3 interviewees and how they fared.
Well, I think the 3 so far are very close to each other. There's not one who completely stands out. I think all 3 of them have a lot of experience, and including Judge Zondo. The 4 of them really are very close to each other. I think what is maybe in the pipeline, and we've seen it as part of the interview of Judge Maya, the president of the Supreme Court of Appeal, is that she might have some advantage, in the sense that the fact that she's a woman, there hasn't been a female Chief Justice so far. That is something which is certainly giving her a plus factor, something which counts in her favor. The fact that she is a very senior judge in her position as leading the Supreme Court of Appeal also counts in her favor. The others are also senior judges, like, for example, Judge President Mlambo that was interviewed yesterday. Judge Matlanga is a member already of the Constitutional Court, but he's not sort of in a leading position. So that might count against or not be so much in favor of him. But each one of them have their strong points and their weak points. So it's going to be a tough task ultimately for, first of all, the Judicial Service Commission and ultimately President Ramaphosa to make a choice. It's actually the fact that he's actually in a good position, that he's not looking for candidates, but rather how to eliminate candidates in order to take his decision. And most people want to be in that position when they have to take a very important decision.
And I want to just slightly belabor the issue around Judge Maya. You mentioned as well that she has an advantage in that she is a woman. But taking that away, and I just want to step aside from that for a moment, because Judge Maya herself basically making that point as well, that, that should not be an issue. It should not give unnecessary advantage. If we were to put that aside, just forget for a moment that is part of who she is, her credentials, what she brings to the table, would that still set her apart for you?
Again, I would say there's not one who stands completely out as being outstanding. In her case, the same. She has her advantage is that she is the leader of the Supreme Court of Appeal, the second highest court in South Africa. That gives her certainly an advantage over the other applicants or the other candidates. At the same time, we had some aspect which counted also in her favor in her interview is that she already delivered judgments in Ixopo, for example, which the others, as far as I know, haven't done. So she demonstrated that she has a sort of a new way of looking at, or the direction in which the judicial system and the judiciary in general, specifically should go. But again, I'm not saying that because of that she is in a class of her own. She has all the credentials in order to become the Chief Justice, and specifically based on her role that she plays in the Supreme Court of Appeal. The one thing one has to take into account when we look at the Chief Justice, it's not only a person who has a very sound knowledge of South African law and even international law, but it is also the person who must have a lot of administrative experience. There is now the Office of the Chief Justice in Midrand, which is responsible to manage all the courts in South Africa. In the past, it was done by the Ministry and the Department of Justice. That has been taken over by the Chief Justice. So there's a lot of managerial and leadership qualities that's necessary for this position. And I think over and above the pure judicial knowledge and the quality of judgments that these four candidates have delivered, it's also about, can they take the lead? Do they have the vision for the judicial system and judiciary specifically for the next number of years? And I think that is something which questions were asked about it, but I would say not enough. And therefore, I would like to see that as becoming quite an important criteria for its selection of the Chief Justice.
And to that point, Professor Kotze, would that not be prejudicial to some of the candidates? If you take, for example, Justice Mlambo, he's being, of course, the judge president at one of the busiest districts in the country. Would that not favor him, for example, in that type of questioning over someone who perhaps does not have to deal with that on a daily basis?
Yes, that will certainly count in his favor. That will also count in the favor of Judge Moya. The fact that they have proven records of what they've done in respect of managing quite important sections of the judiciary. And I think that will indeed count ultimately when the final decision is taken about whether they will be nominated or not.
And then, Professor, your thoughts on Justice Mlambo, and I'm asking you about this from yesterday's interview because we have been, as the week has progressed, basically unpacked some of these interviews. So yesterday was the turn of Justice Mlambo. Do you think it was fair, for example, some of the questions that he was asked about serious allegations against him?
Well, I think at this level, this is the highest level in the judiciary, the Chief Justice. This is a person who should be able to deal with all controversies, all parts of his or her own history, in order to make sure that the necessary level of credibility, even one can say of legitimacy, exists in the office of the Chief Justice and the incumbent. So there are very few questions, I would say, that will be excluded from an interview like this, except if it become completely personal matters that is beyond the relevance also of this position. But otherwise, I think the purpose of an interview like this is to put the person on the spot in order for this person or this candidate to explain all aspects of his or her career, knowledge of the law, and what they've done in the past, as well as the conditions sort of related to that. And I think so it is about the reputation, the integrity, the credibility, all those aspects of a candidate.
And I think what was interesting, at least from what I was listening to there, Professor Kotze, was the lack of a sexual harassment policy at this level. What did you make of that?
Yes, that appears to be the case in the Constitutional Court, but it looks as if in other courts they do have such a policy. So it really exposes the Constitutional Court in terms of this as something which has to be done. It's not necessary that has to be done in the form of legislation, that it must be passed by Parliament, therefore. The court can decide on its own, on its internal policy in this respect. And I think this is something which whoever is now being appointed ultimately as the Chief Justice will certainly have to take on in order to deal with it and introduce that for the Constitutional Court.
And then, of course, today's interview is a much anticipated one. Some people, of course, expecting it to be more political. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, well, we all know Judge Zondo, watching him on television for almost 4 years now. So he is well known to the public in South Africa. He's also well known for some of the rulings that he made as chairperson of the Zondo Commission. I think the aspect which is possibly going to receive quite a lot of attention is the way in which he dealt with the case of President Zuma and how it led to the case being referred to the Constitutional Court and not to, for example, a lower court like the High Court, which then ultimately made it impossible for President Zuma to have the right to appeal or have the opportunity to appeal against the original judgment. And that led to the crisis, I would say, where he publicly criticized the Constitutional Court as well as many judges and in a sense undermined the credibility of the judiciary in general in South Africa. And I think that comes being back to Judge Zondo in terms of the choice he made, most possibly with some advice also, but in the end he takes responsibility for it. And especially those critical of President Ramaphosa, and he will also, like Judge President Mlambo, most possibly be criticized that he's too pro-Ramaphosa in what he has done up to now, and not have a sort of an independent stance, that line of argument or questions will most possibly become a very important point of this interview.
Well, we'll have to leave it there for today, but thank you so much for your time. Professor Dirk Kotze, a political analyst, speaking to us about the JSC interviews and what's happened so far, and of course also anticipating that interview with the acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo today.